Ho fellers, PV2 Smurf here. Today I'm going to show you how to run a wire with an added fuse. Basically what we're going to do is run a wire that will run over behind your rear view mirror that's mounted on the windshield. The reason for doing this could be several factors. If your version or model comes with a GoPro camera mount, assuming you want to put in a dash cam or anything that goes up in this area, then you're going to need to run a power wire over there. You only want voltage run to the electronic that you're running while the key is on and not all the time. This will eliminate parasitic drain amongst many other issues that you may encounter. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to run this all the way over here, all the way back in here, down this A-pillar, down, and we're going to tie it in to the fuse box. If this sounds like something interesting, something you need to do your rig, well, you stay tuned and I'm going to show you how. Hey fellas, PV2 Smurf here. PV2 Smurf here. PV2 Smurf here. Oh fellas, PV2 Smurf here. Alright fellas, so this is roughly what we're going to use to complete this project. So wire cutters, a voltage tester. This is a mini added fuse. On Tacoma they use the mini fuses. They don't use the bigger fuses. They always use the mini ones. As you can tell, the difference are the limb that's right down here on this right here, this part down here in the bottom. Those are the mini fuses. So on these fuses right here specifically for this Tacoma are low profile mini fuses. I think this is something they're going to make standard moving forward with the Toyota brand specifically, especially Tacoma, because once they change something they normally never go back as far as electrical and things go. So these fuses are specific. You have to have one of these for this added fuse. And so I went ahead and bought a pack so I'd have some. Yeah, I still have some underneath the dash, as you remember from my last video that I did, which you should be able to see. I'll post a link to it right up here on checking your windshield washer sprayer. Be located here. Now this added fuse, how does it work? Well, it's pretty simple. Basically, we remove the fuse we want. We plug this in. This part right here gets plugged in. Put the fuse back in for it in the first one. See, there's two, so the close one to the bottom, we'll put the fuse back in it. That works, the fuse that we're removing, we'll put it back in right here. Then the line that we're adding, we're going to take power from, which will be running our accessory one, will go in this top one. See how the wire lead rolls off of it? And that's how we'll end up using this. And I'll walk you through how to do this. Nope, don't panic. I also bought blue and yellow just because I could have bought red and black, but I thought, well, we'll go with blue and yellow. So colors really matter. I bought 16 gauge wire. The reason why I bought specific wires, it says it's good for 15 amps, 180 watts. Now I'm not running anything that's 15 amps by no means, but I figured I want to make sure that I got adequate wire. I didn't want to buy a smaller wire because this is a lot of wire, and then in the future end up needing this wire and wanting to run something 15 amps and not having enough. So I just bought this wire. I want everybody to know that I'm not sponsored by any one of these products, but these are what we're using for the install. I did want to make note that if you go to test voltage on this one specifically, this test light specifically, not all of them do, but most of them do to my knowledge. If you accidentally hook these backwards, some of you're checking a wire and you connect the connection and the light on it actually lights up green. As you can see, that means they're wired in backwards. So that means that you're touching this to the ground and the other one to the positive. In that case, make sure you reverse your connection because you don't want to wire whatever you're running backwards because it's not going to work or it's going to blow a fuse. But if you see this green light sometimes on some of these test gauges like this on a connection, that means that you got it backwards. Make sure that you correct that. So see, if you correct this, after it's corrected, you do it, it's red. And that's what you want, it's red. That means you're wiring it right. It means you're touching the positive with the probe and then the clamp is on the negative, or the ground, I'm sorry. Something else that's a good rule of practice is you want to make sure a fuse has got power, as you can see here. going to take your add a fuse piece that you bought. You want to plug this in. You plug this right here in. Then you want to voltage check each one of these right here to make sure that they function correctly. Because you don't want to plumb wire all this up and then realize this connection's bad or can't figure out why you can't get power. Even though it's new doesn't mean it actually works, so you want to check that. So the way we're going to check it is we're going to plug this in. I know this is getting power already. Plug this in right here. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch the inside of it with my test light. So I'm going to plug this in just like this. Make sure it's getting power on each one of them. And we are. Got a good connection. There it is. There it is. You want to make sure that this thing functions before you put it in. So that way you can determine, is it an issue with the part, is it a fuse or what? So that way that's all eliminated. Good rule of thumb. Just because it's a brand new part does not mean that it's not bad. Trust me. Be diligent and do that. It'll be worth the effort. Now some of you are going to ask, why did he test that using the fuse box under the hood? Well, just because it's more accessible at the current moment. You can use one under the dash, but it's a little bit less accessible and it's also a little hard to film to show you. But you can use either one. Whichever one you want to use, perfectly fine. Just as long as you check it before you actually do the install. As much as you may be tempted to use this right here and run your wire out here, I would urge you not to do so. And the reason being is every single fuse with the key off seemingly has power except for the ones that say injectors or EFI on it. And I just don't feel real confident in disrupting the computer's electronic signal for those specific sensors. So it'd be best to use the one that's underneath the dash. So I'm locating the one underneath the dash. Look right underneath the dash here, and it'll be on our left. And right there will be the fuse box. Now the only problem and the only issue I really have with this is once you use the add a fuse for this, you're probably going to lose the cover, and the cover has all the labels on it. Now fellas, this should go without saying, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you run enough wire over here. I'm measuring it. I'm going to use a piece of wire. And I'm going to measure how much wire I need. And I'm going to leave excess both down in where I can hide it, which will go over and hide in behind this pillar, or down inside the bottom of the dash here where the fuse box is. The other thing you want to make sure you do is you want to leave excess slack located over here. So assuming in the future you decide that, hey, I'm going to upgrade cameras and it uses a different end, different port. Well, if you leave excess here, always will have room to move it, to pull your camera down if you need to get something off of it. It'll still have power. The other reason why you want to do that is if you get a new camera and it doesn't have the same end on it that goes on the end of it, you can always cut this end, solder you a new end on, and then you can plug it into your new camera. Because you know, typically when we go with a project or something new, such as a dash cam or things of that sort, you always go the cheapest option. Then the cheapest option don't work out, and you decide, you know what, I really like this, I want to upgrade. So then you upgrade, and then the power adapter is different. You can buy an adapter that'll convert it over, but in the event that you don't, well, in my case, instead of buying an adapter, what I'm going to do is just leave this here. I can always cut this, put the fitting on it that I need that I can run to whatever camera I want to. So make sure that you're diligent in doing this. So all I'm going to do is run this wire over. All I'm doing at the time being is just tucking it up underneath here about where it's going to go. This headliner, and I'm going to run it down. So I'm just going to run it down, and it'll hide back in here enough to where I won't see it. And I'll run this down, and I'll make sure that I run this down and run this all the way down through here, down and out of the way to where you won't see it, and I won't have to worry about it. But that's my plan of attack, and that's what we're going to do. So what I end up doing is measuring it all the way, and I'm actually going to cut this end off because I'm not going to plug it in anymore. What I'm going to do is I measured off what I want, and I'm going to cut it right here. I'll maybe use this adapter in the future on something else. Cut this right here off, then I'll pull these wires back and separate them. To determine which wire goes to what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, plug this inside the cigarette lighter, then I'm going to use a voltage meter or test light and determine which wire is positive, which one's negative, so that way we wire up the fuse right. So now all I did was went ahead and pre-measured this wire. I'm going to cut it off, cut both of them even. It's alright if I cut a little more, no big deal. Remove the ends of these wires right here. Try to make them even on both sides. One thing you want to make sure when you are removing the end to expose these wires is you want to make sure you don't use too small of a gauge on this tool, because if you do, you cut some of the wire, you damage the integrity of this being able to hold the amperage in which it's rated for. Both of those done. We're also going to go ahead while we're at it. This is our power adapter. See when I cut that, see how I cut the red one off? Something you got to watch for, which is alright in this case because I don't want to solder them together so it does not leave a big pregnant spot in the wire. And here is why I staggered these. If you put a butt connector here and you put one down here, you wrap this in a loom, then they're staggered. If you do them both and you cut them both off the same length, then you butt connect them, then you got one spot that'll be taped up or inside a shrink tube that'll be really fat in one spot. So I always stagger mine such as this. You're more than welcome to do whatever you'd like. This is the way I'm going to do it. Since these wires right here are smaller than the wires we're going to be connecting them to, what I'm going to do is actually solder these wires together. So that way I don't have to worry about them losing any kind of connection. Plus I've kind of set out to make a goal to learn to solder a little better than what I do, which is very bare minimum. Now mind you, I'm no expert. I'm not going in great detail on how to solder because I really have very, 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 very minimal experience on soldering. So what I'm going to do basically is just solder these two wires right here together. I actually bought a kit off a very popular online site. The kit comes with everything to solder. I watched a couple videos. I'm just trying to get practice at it because I always learn the best way to learn how to do something new is practice, right? So I watched quite a few videos and I'm going to give it a whirl. One tip I will give you that I seen I thought was pretty neat was you need to hold two wires and you don't have a handy helper, I think they call it, that holds the wires. You can actually get a lid off a paint can. We all got a rattle can laying around here. Get one of those and you can set the wire down in here like this to hold the wire on this side. Whatever wire you're going to solder, spot on the other side. You run this down in here like this, and when you do that, assuming yours is not quickly thrown together like mine, but when you do that, hold these together and you go to solder, they'll hold yourself together and you don't have to worry about sitting here trying to hold them and push against it. So it'll hold itself better. So that way, this right here is free. You probably got one laying around. Any kind of slag or anything that drops off of it or whatever will end up down in here. Then if you want, you can keep this, throw it away, whatever. But still, that's a good little tip to use. So I'm going to solder these together. And there's your cover. There's our fuses we're going to be utilizing for this install. So on this fuse cover, as you can see, has a list of all the fuses. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to probe and see which one only gets power with the key on. Then once we figure out which one gets power, that's the one we're going to remove and insert or add a fuse in. Now just so you know, this is the rear of the fuse box. So these fuses are listed, these are rear, and then this goes to the front. The front is, so this is pointing from the engine to the tailgate. It's a fuse panel, so that way you're aware. Another way, if you're not really sure, just look at the fuses and see if they've not been changed. You could tell, you can line up the amperage of the fuse to determine which one actually goes to what and which direction this is facing. Now let's probe with some wires. What I'm going to do is hook my ground right there, and I know that's a good ground. We used to wire in our brake controller box. I believe it went to that one. I also know because I can touch one of the other wires. It actually has power on it with the key off. As you can tell, we got us a little light, so I know that that's a good ground. Now the fuse we're going to be using is probably one that says, I assume that power outlet 2 is the one going to the middle console. So to test this, we find the correct one, which would be the third one back on the left side. I'm sorry, it's the right side here. And we have no power. Key in. Now we have power. No power. Accessory on. If you want to determine which outlet is wired to what, all you have to do, of course, is remove the fuse, plug something in that outlet, and you'll see which outlet goes where. When removing the 15 amp power outlet 1, the fuse works the front cigarette lighter port, which is located below the radio. So power outlet 2 has to go to the one inside the middle console. For electrical interference issues, because I do have a CB radio, I'm actually going to use power outlet 2 to run my devices, so I don't have to worry about any kind of electronic interference. I'm not really too for sure if it will interfere with the radio in any way, but just to be sure, I'm going to use power outlet 2. Another reason why I'm using power outlet 2 instead of power outlet 1 is because power outlet 2 I only use to run to my dash mount that we previously installed in this truck, so I don't have to worry about it interfering with the power to that, and it won't interfere with CB radio. So this fuse goes to power outlet 2. It is on the left side of the fuse box, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one back, and it's between a 10 amp and a 7.5 amp, and it's only 15 amp there, so no way you can get it wrong. What I'm going to do is take our add fuse. I'm going to plug this in here, so this fuses power back to that fuse, so that outlet still gets its power. Then whatever amperage you want for your add-on, you're going to add that fuse right here. In my case, I'm only going to go with a 10 amp. I shouldn't need anything any bigger for what I'm doing. So I'm going to put me a 10 amp fuse in this. To note, the 10 amp in the pack I got and the ones in the dash, the 10 amp's red. I don't ever remember the fuse color, I just looked the number on it. And I'm going to slide this inside our add fuse port right here. And so now our new circuit that I run on this wire is wired for 10 amps. Now to reinstall this, all you have to do is put this back up here and push it back in place where the fuse, where the original fuse, the fuse we just took out, come from. Push that in. Now depending if you want your wire to go this way from the fuse box, and run it this way. If you'd rather it go the other way, so you could see it, you're more than welcome to flip this thing, pull it back out like this, flip this thing around. Now be aware that that will block off the fuse behind it. You'll have to remove this to get to it. Now what we want to do is we want to verify that this is getting voltage. We'll turn the key back on. Take our test light. And all we want to do is end, it's already on here. You just want to probe it, make sure a light comes on. Light on. Now that's in the key on the on position. Accessory position, off. Now we're ready to begin and connect all of our wiring, electronic device we're going to be adding. Fishing this wire down through here has been kind of challenging. So what I'm going to do, I got a coat hanger and I cut the end off of it, and it's sharp on the end here, so I'm just going to cover it with some tape. Feed this down through here. When it comes out the bottom I want it at, take the other end, we'll attach it to the coat hanger, we'll tape it up really good, and then we'll just fish it and pull it all the way through the bottom, so that will be down there located where a fuse box is. If you're switching cameras, I wasn't sure if you could actually see the fuse panel very well. So right here's your better view of the fuse panel. And as you can see on the right, fourth one down, fifth one down, it says P/outlet number 2. That's the one that we tapped. The one on the left, third one from the top, is P/outlet number 1. That goes to your front cigarette lighter port. So now you can see the coat hanger is pushed all the way through the bottom here, located here. So now what I'm going to do is follow it back up to the top here. Take the end of this, attach my wires to it, tape it really good, and then all I have to do is just pull it through to the bottom. That way we don't have to take any of this dash piece or any of this other stuff apart. And one thing you want to make sure that you do when you do this is you don't want to make this too pregnant. You don't want it to swell out, because if you do, this is probably not going to fit down in your spot there. So you just want to make sure that you just get taped just enough to where it'll hold the wire, and then we'll pull it through from the bottom. As you can see, just like that, now we have our wires pulled down through here so we can connect them to the power and to the ground. Now the next step you'll need to do is go ahead and run your wires where you're going to mount them at permanently, so that way they're up and out of the way. Before I hide this wire for good, I just want to show you all this. See how I staggered these, the way I sorted them together? Since I staggered these pretty well, makes it really easy for me to, if I want to tape these up, which I'm going to do, whatever they're staggered so there's not a pregnant spot in the wire. Another quick tip before you hide these, pull out your voltage tester if you got one, check connectivity. Make sure that these wires are actually have a good connection with zero resistance going from there to the actual plug-in portion you're using, so that way you know that this is a good solid connection before you hide these wires. That should go without saying, fellas. I previously stated I was going to do this install without removing this pillar because it won't break the plastic trim. But the fact is, I just can't get the wire back in there where I want it, so it's not visible. So to remove this trim piece, pop this SR5 airbag piece out, take that out, and you'll need a socket. It's a 10 millimeter and a socket. I got an extension, so it made it a little easier to turn. After you do that, that piece just comes right loose just like that. So that will allow you to hide it. So take this piece loose. Just save yourself trouble. 10 millimeter socket. Take this piece loose. It's worth it, trust me. So now that we got this trim piece loose, got access to every bit of this stuff. Here's the airbag, by the way. We don't want to interfere with that by no means. This wire down in here out of the way, because remember we do have extra, which we're going to tuck in at the bottom. Running this right down here. This is the wire that goes to the top. So what we can do is we can take and tuck all this wire inside with this other loom here that's already here. My assumption is these are the wires that are running power to the mirror and dome lights. So you could probably tap into that right there if you'd like. I chose it goes to the fuse box. But we're going to run this wire with this other wire here, so that way it's tucked in out of the way. It won't be sticking up on us or sticking out. It'll be noticeable. It'll be a nice clean install. As you can see, all of our wire is tucked in really nicely with the loom all the way down. Be sure to not put it on top of any of these clip places that this pillar goes back in right here. We don't want to have to worry about messing that up or getting that out of whack. Now we'll reinstall, tighten up, snap that back on there. As you can see, wire's not visible anywhere down through here and it's out of the way. Make sure if you took this loose right here, you go ahead and put it back in place, because this actually will hold pressure against this and this will keep the rattling noise and things down. Now what I'm going to do is remove this piece. Undid this screw it's in here. All this is covered. And the brake controller box install. A link to it is right up here. Click there to see. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and remove this, so that way I can connect my ground, which is my yellow one, to the same ground as my brake controller, because I know my brake controller works just fine. It has no issue with ground. And I'll have one spot that has a ground, instead of having to take another bolt loose and grounding it and then having two different grounding spots. I'll just ground it in the same spot. So there's a brake controller ground. All I'm going to do is hook a yellow wire, this butt connector, put it back in the same spot. Now for this add fuse, I'm actually going to use the crimp connector that come on it. And the reason why I'm using this crimp connector is so in the event in the future I have to change it, and just cut this wire, cut that, and replace it. If I solder it, I can still do the same, but this is already on here. But one thing I always do, especially considering this is a power wire, even though it's crimped and there's no markings or anything on this, since it doesn't show any kind of metal coming through at all where I crimped it, I still always cover any kind of my power wires, specifically with black tape, or you could put a heat shrink tube over it just to be sure. I don't have to worry about this power touching the ground and causing fuse to blow or a fire. Now for the moment of truth. Everything's back in before we put everything completely back together. Let's see if we have power up here. Key in, accessory position.
Testing.
On position.
System ready.
Took a winner to me. Hey fellas, well, I appreciate you for tuning in on the video. If I have anything that I missed, could have done a little bit better or whatever, let me know in the comment section below. As always, guys, remember, your rig, your call.